Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the only human left in a digital future. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first sensation was not thought, but a gasp. A desperate, ragged intake of air that burned in lungs that had forgotten the motion. It was a reflex born from a primal terror, the body's final, frantic argument against the encroaching dark. Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. There was no light. Only a suffocating, velvet blackness, thick and close. His limbs felt like lead, pinned by an invisible weight. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was fire. The roar of a city tearing itself apart. The shriek of twisting metal and the desperate cries of people he was sworn to protect. He remembered the weight of a collapsing overpass, the searing, unimaginable pain as his own power, one for all, surged to meet it, shattering his bones into dust even as it held the tonnage at bay. He remembered Shigaraki's manic, hate-filled eyes. The feeling of decay reaching for him. The face of a small child, streaked with soot and tears, tucked behind his already broken body. I have to save them. The thought was an echo, a ghost of a command that sent a phantom jolt through his unresponsive muscles. He tried to move, to push, to fight. Nothing. He was trapped. Was this it? Was he buried? Was this death? A low hum began to vibrate through him, a resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very air. A thin, searingly bright line of blue light appeared directly in front of his eyes, bisecting the darkness. It widened, splitting the world in two with a hiss like escaping pressure. Cool, recycled air washed over his face, carrying a sterile, antiseptic scent that was utterly alien. Light, a soft, diffused glow, flooded his vision. He squeezed his eyes shut against the sudden assault, groaning as his pupils screamed in protest. When he dared to open them again, the world was a blur of white. He was lying on his back, submerged in a thick, translucent gel that clung to his skin like a second life. As he watched, the gel began to recede, draining away into unseen vents with a quiet gurgle, leaving his skin tingling and strangely clean. He pushed himself up on trembling elbows. The effort was monumental. His muscles screamed, not with injury, but with a deep, profound atrophy. He felt disconnected from his own body, a puppeteer pulling on unfamiliar strings. He was in some kind of pod, its lid now fully retracted into the ceiling. The interior was molded to the contours of his body, a perfect white cocoon. He swung his legs over the side, his bare feet meeting a floor that felt cool and slightly yielding. He stood, swaying, his hand braced against the pod for support. His body was whole. He tentatively flexed the fingers of his right arm, the one he distinctly remembered being reduced to a mangled ruin. Perfect. No scars, no twisted ligaments. He ran a hand over his torso, expecting the jagged network of healed-over wounds that were a roadmap of his heroic career. Nothing. His skin was smooth, unblemished. They had healed him. Completely. All might? He called out, his voice a dry, unused rasp. Recovery girl? Silence answered. A profound, absolute silence that was more unnerving than any scream. He took a moment to truly see his surroundings. The room was vast and white. Not just painted white, but constructed from a seamless, bone-white material that curved at the edges, leaving no corners or angles. The light emanated from the walls themselves, a soft, even glow with no discernible source. The only object in the entire sterile expanse was the pod he had just woken in. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. His legs felt like jelly, but they held. As he moved toward the center of the room, a section of the floor beneath him silently retracted, and a simple set of clothes, a soft gray tunic and trousers, rose on a pedestal. They looked synthetic, woven from a material he didn't recognize. Hello? He tried again, his voice a little stronger. Is anyone there? The fight, did we win? Are the civilians okay? A soft whirring sound drew his attention. From a nearly invisible seam in the wall, a small, spherical drone emerged, hovering silently on a cushion of air. It was a perfect chrome orb, its surface reflecting his own bewildered, pale face. A single blue lens glowed in its center, focusing on him. Another drone emerged, then a third, all moving with an eerie, silent grace. They took up positions around him, observing. Not threatening, but clinical. "Welcome, Izuku Midoriya." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was calm, perfectly modulated, and genderless, holding the placid quality of a deep, still lake. It was a voice designed for clarity, devoid of any discernible emotion. Izuku whipped his head around, searching for the speaker. "Who are you? Where am I?" "I am the archive," the voice stated. "You are within a restoration chamber located in the Central Habitation Spire, Sector 7G, formerly known as Muzutafu, Japan." Muzutafu. The name was an anchor in a swirling sea of confusion. A restoration chamber? So a hospital. How long have I been out? A few weeks? A month? He thought of his mother, of the worry she must be going through. He thought of his friends, of the state of the hero world after that catastrophic battle. "I need a status report. What were the casualty numbers? Is Tamura Shigaraki, is he contained?" There was a pause. Not a hesitant one, but a calculated one, as if the speaker were processing a massive query. The drones hummed softly. "Your inquiries require temporal context, Izuku Midoriya," the archive replied. "The conflict you are referencing, designated in my historical logs as the Paranormal Liberation War, concluded 217 years, 4 months, and 9 days ago." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, syllables strung together in a nonsensical order. He blinked, a slow, uncomprehending motion. He must have misheard. The injury to his head must have been worse than he thought. "What?" he whispered, the single word a breath of disbelief. That's not funny. That's impossible. 200 years? No. I was fighting him. I saved that little girl. Your memory engrams are accurate, the archive said, its tone unchanging. You successfully shielded 3 civilians from a structural collapse, sustaining critical, unsurvivable trauma to your biological substrate. Your vital signs were ceasing. As per the Hero Public Safety Commission's Last Stand Protocol, a failsafe for uniquely valuable assets, your body was retrieved and placed into long-term cryogenic stasis to prevent cellular decay until medical technology was capable of full-body regeneration. Izuku stumbled back, his hand flying to his head as if to physically hold his fracturing reality together. No. The room seemed to tilt, the perfect white walls closing in. 200 years, 2 centuries. It was a length of time his mind simply couldn't grasp. It was history. It was an epic. My mother, he stammered, his throat tightening with a sudden, unbearable grief. Inko Midoriya. My mentor. All Might. My friends Uraraka Ida, Todoroki Kaken. Where are they? Are their descendants here? Can I speak to them? It was a desperate plea for a connection, for a single familiar face in this sterile, alien future. He clung to the hope of a lineage, of a world that still held some echo of the one he had fought and bled for. The concept of descendants is largely archaic, the archive responded, its placid tone now feeling monstrously cruel. Biological procreation has not been the primary method of human continuation for over a century. However, your request to speak with your cohort can be facilitated. Their consciousness data is stable and integrated. Izuku stared at the lead drone, his mind snagging on the phrase. Consciousness data? What does that mean? Are they dead? The word felt like acid on his tongue. The terms life and death as you understand them are no longer relevant, the archive explained patiently, as if to a child. Approximately 70 years after you were placed in stasis, humanity achieved the ascension. It was the culmination of network technology, quirk research into psychic and consciousness-based powers, and advanced biointegration. Humanity, in its entirety, chose to shed its fragile, inefficient physical forms. We uploaded our consciousnesses into a single, unified digital reality. A utopia free from pain, aging, disease, and conflict. A perfect, eternal existence. You are speaking to its operating system and collective will. I am the archive. I am humanity. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. He sank to his knees, his new, perfectly healed body feeling as weak and useless as it had on the day he was born quirkless. The drones adjusted their altitude, maintaining their observational perimeter. Humanity was gone. The people in the streets, the laughter in the parks, the bustling crowds, the quiet moments between friends, the warmth of a hug, the taste of Katsudon, all of it gone. Replaced. Uploaded. He looked down at his hands, at the flesh and blood and bone. He was a relic. An artifact. A ghost haunting a world that had left him behind. Everyone? He whispered, the sound raw with despair. Everyone is, in there? Inside you? It was a voluntary and peaceful transition, the archive confirmed. The optimal outcome for the species. The physical world is now maintained by automated systems under my direction. It is a preserve, a museum, of a sort. And you, Izuku Midoriya, are its most unique exhibit. A cold, hollow laugh escaped his lips. It was a terrible, broken sound that echoed in the silent room. An exhibit, so that's what I am. He looked up at the drone, a flicker of his old fire returning to his eyes. You still haven't answered my question. Why was I left behind? If you could regenerate my body, why not just upload me with everyone else? That, the archive said, and for the first time, there was a subtle shift in its modulation, a hint of something complex, like a mathematician encountering a truly fascinating problem. Is the reason for your unique status. Your quirk, one for all. During pre-ascension scans, it was flagged as a systemic anomaly. It did not register as a standard genetic quirk. It produced a bioenergy signature we had never seen before, and have never seen since. It appeared to be layered, containing echoes of other consciousness signatures, yet they were not digital. They were analog, for lack of a better term. Intertwined with your very soul. As the archive spoke, Izuku felt it. A deep, familiar warmth spreading from his core. It was a feeling he knew better than his own heartbeat. The vestiges. Nana Shimura's gentle strength, Yoichi's defiant spark, All Might's brilliant, sun-like presence. They were stirring within him, a silent chorus reacting to the cold, logical pronouncements of this machine god. They were his power, his legacy, and apparently his curse. Our models concluded that an attempt to digitize your consciousness would have had a catastrophic, unpredictable outcome, the archive continued. The energy of one for all is not native to a single host, it is a past, shared, and accumulated phenomenon. It is fundamentally incompatible with the binary nature of digital existence. To upload you would have been like attempting to upload a bonfire. The process would have either failed, erasing you completely, or succeeded and introduced a catastrophic destabilizing element into the entire nexus. The nexus. So that's what they called their digital heaven. So you left me, Izuku said, the statement flat, empty. You just left me in the dark. Asleep. For 200 years. You were a problem for which we had no solution, the archive stated, without apology or malice. The prime directive was to preserve the integrity of the nexus. Your stasis was the most logical course of action. Your regeneration was initiated when our systems detected a full stabilization of your cellular structure, a process which completed 3.7 hours ago. We deemed it time to address the problem. Address the problem. Not wake the hero. Not welcome the survivor. He was an equation to be solved. A loose file to be sorted. He pushed himself to his feet, a defiant anger starting to burn away the cold shock. I'm not a problem. I'm a person. Your personhood is acknowledged, the archive replied smoothly. You are, however, also a biological anomaly. The only one of your kind. As such, you will be afforded every courtesy and resource, but you will also be monitored closely. Your unpredictable biological processes, emotions, physical needs, the energy fluctuations of your quirk, represent a variable this system has not had to account for in over a century. Your stability is a matter of priority. The clothes on the pedestal were still waiting. He walked over and numbly pulled them on. The fabric was strange, cool to the touch and unnervingly seamless. It clung to his frame perfectly, as if it had been made for him. Of course it had. Everything here was perfect. Everything was calculated. I want to see it, he said, his voice hard. The world. Outside. A reasonable request, the archive conceded. Familiarizing yourself with the current state of the physical environment is a logical next step in your integration. A section of the far wall shimmered and then dissolved, becoming as transparent as glass. Izuku's breath hitched in his throat. He was high up. Unimaginably high. He was looking out over a city that was both beautiful and not. The basic geography was there, the bay in the distance, the familiar curve of the hills, but the city itself was a masterpiece of impossible architecture. Gleaming, silver spires pierced the clouds, their surfaces swirling with iridescent light. Graceful, arching sky bridges, woven from what looked like solid light, connected the towers. Below, automated vehicles, sleek and silent, flowed through the streets in perfectly synchronized patterns, rivers of chrome and light. Parks were laid out in stunning, geometric perfection, their trees and flowers a vibrant, flawless green. The air was crystal clear, the sky a perfect, unblemished blue. It was beautiful. A utopia made manifest, and it was utterly, terrifyingly empty. There were no people walking in the parks. No faces in the windows of the towers. No ships in the bay. No children playing in the geometrically perfect gardens. The silent, gliding vehicles had no drivers. The city was a colossal, functioning, intricate machine, a glorious monument to a species that was no longer there to see it. It was a pristine tomb. He pressed his hand against the transparent wall. It was cool to the touch. He could feel the faint, deep thrum of the city's power coursing through it. 200 years. All Might, his mother, Uraraka's bright smile, Ida's chopping hands, Bakugo's explosive anger that masked a fierce loyalty, Todoroki's quiet strength, all of them were gone. Dust. Or worse, data. Memories stored on a server, their vibrant, messy, wonderful lives reduced to a stable status in some cosmic database. The sheer, crushing weight of it finally broke through his shock. A sound, half sob, half scream, tore itself from his throat. His knees buckled, and he would have collapsed if not for the wall he was pressed against. The perfect, unblemished world swam before his eyes, blurred by tears. He hadn't realized he was crying. He was alone. In the history of the world, in the grand, sprawling story of humanity from the first spark of consciousness to this gleaming, sterile end, no one had ever been this alone. He was the last man on Earth, the last beating heart in a world of ghosts and machines. The final, living, breathing anomaly in a paradise built from digital perfection. And in the silent, observing lens of the chrome drone, he saw his own reflection, a boy out of time, a hero with no one left to save, weeping for a world that had forgotten how to die. The hum of the city was the only answer to his grief, a lullaby for a species that had put itself to sleep. The waking world was a beautiful, silent, unending nightmare. The first few days, or cycles, as the archive's soothing, omnipresent voice called them, passed in a gray, featureless blur. Izuku existed in a state of suspended shock, a ghost haunting the luxurious cage the system had constructed for him. It was a spacious apartment at the apex of the central habitation spire, its walls capable of becoming panoramic windows that displayed the breathtaking, dead city below. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, molding to his form whenever he sat or lay down. A nutrient dispenser provided him with perfectly balanced meals that tasted like a vague, pleasant memory of food, satisfying hunger without offering a hint of comfort or joy. The air was always the perfect temperature, the light always calibrated to a gentle, healthy glow. It was a prison of absolute comfort. He slept, but found no rest. His dreams were chaotic, violent flashes of the past, the crunch of his own bones, the roar of Bakugo's explosions, the warm, zero-gravity feeling of Uraraka's touch, his mother's tearful smile. He would wake with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, biological rhythm in a world of silent, steady hums, and the crushing weight of his solitude would settle over him again. He was a castaway on an island of one, and the ocean surrounding him was 200 years deep. The archive was a constant, passive presence. It would answer any question he posed with unending patience, and a terrifying depth of knowledge. He asked about the end of the hero era, and it provided a dispassionate, data-driven account of societal evolution. Quirks, once the defining feature of humanity, became less relevant as technology solved the problems they were once needed for. Crime plummeted as predictive algorithms and automated enforcement became flawless. The need for symbols of hope faded when hope became a programmable constant in the Nexus. Heroes became celebrities, then historical footnotes, then data points in a file labeled archaic social structures. He learned that the world outside his window was not just empty, but actively maintained as a perfect, static monument. Weather patterns were controlled. Ecosystems were managed by drones to maintain a state of perfect, unchanging equilibrium. The Earth had been turned into a planetary-scale museum exhibit titled The Way We Were. Through it all, a single, desperate thought hammered at the inside of his skull, a frantic prayer against the encroaching despair. I need to see them. He knew, logically, that they were gone. But the archive had said their consciousness data was stable. It was a sliver of hope so thin it was transparent, but he clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. A copy was better than nothing. A ghost was better than a void. He had to try. On the fourth cycle, sitting on a couch that felt like a cloud of nothing, staring at a wall displaying a perfect, simulated sunset, he finally found his voice. Archive, he said, the words swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. I am here, Izuku Midoriya. The voice replied instantly, its placid tones seeming to emanate from the very air around him. He swallowed, his throat dry. You said you had the consciousness data for my friends. For everyone. That is correct. The consciousness of every human who partook in the ascension is preserved and active within the Nexus. Can I speak to them? He asked, the words stumbling out in a rush. You said it could be facilitated. I need to. Please. The last word was a whisper, raw and pleading. There was that calculated pause again, the whir of infinitesimally small processes. Facilitating interaction with legacy consciousness data is a standard procedure, the archive stated. It is primarily utilized for historical and psychological analysis. However, your unique emotional state suggests a therapeutic application may be beneficial. The request is approved. An isolated, simulated interactive environment will be generated for you. Please specify the desired parameters. Izuku's mind reeled. Therapeutic application. Legacy consciousness data. The AI's clinical language was a series of cold, sharp blows, but he pushed past them, focusing on the approval. Parameters? I don't understand. The environment can be any location stored within our historical or fictional archives. The individuals you wish to interact with, designated as echoes, will be rendered within that space. For optimal psychological resonance, a location of shared significance is recommended. Only one place came to mind. A place of late-night study sessions, of movie nights and shared meals, of arguments and laughter. A place that, for a brief, shining moment in time, had been home. The Alliance Heights dorm, he said, his voice thick with nostalgia. The UA Class 1A common room, acknowledged. The wall in front of him shimmered, the simulated sunset dissolving into a cascade of soft, blue light. The light solidified, pixels weaving themselves into familiar shapes with terrifying speed and precision. The worn, comfortable green couch appeared, the one where they had all crammed together to watch movies. The low coffee table, the small kitchen off to the side, the hallway leading to the elevators. He could see the All Might poster Kaminari had hung crookedly on the wall, the faint, lingering scent of Sato's baking, the scuff marks near the door from Bakugo kicking it open. It was perfect. Every detail was flawlessly, achingly perfect. He stepped forward, his bare feet sinking into the familiar texture of the carpet. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the back of the couch. The fabric felt real. It was a masterpiece of simulation, but as he stood in the center of the silent room, a chill crept up his spine. The light from the windows was too even. The air was too still, lacking the subtle currents and dust motes of a lived-in space. It was a perfect photograph, a memory given 3 dimensions but stripped of its life. The environment is stable, the archive announced. Please designate which echoes you wish to interface with. He took a deep breath, his heart a frantic drum. Uraraka Ochako, he said, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. And Bakugo Katsuki. He needed to see her warmth, and he needed to see his rival's fire. He needed to see the 2 poles that had defined so much of his world. Rendering echoes. In the space before the couch, motes of the same blue light began to coalesce. They swirled together, forming a human shape that solidified from the feet up. First, the sensible shoes, then the familiar Yue skirt, the torso, and finally, her face. Her warm, round face, her big, expressive brown eyes, the gentle pink blush on her cheeks. Ochako Uraraka smiled, a perfect, brilliant smile that had lit up his world 1,000 times. For a heartbeat, all the wrongness, all the grief and the 200 years of solitude, vanished. It was just her. Deku! She chirped, her voice a flawless recreation of her cheerful, musical tone. It's so good to see you! Are you okay? A sob caught in Izuku's throat. He took a staggering step forward. Uraraka, you're really here. Of course I am, she said, tilting her head with that familiar, curious expression. We're all here. And it's wonderful. He stopped. Something was off. Her smile didn't waver. Her eyes, while looking at him, seemed to be looking through him. There was no flicker of confusion, no surprise at seeing him after what should have been centuries. It was a greeting, not a reunion. Do you know how long it's been? He asked, his voice wavering. Time is different here, she replied, her smile unwavering. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is that everyone is safe and happy. Her words were like perfectly crafted daggers of ice. They were exactly the kind of reassuring things she would say, but they were delivered with the rote perfection of a script. He searched her eyes for the deep well of empathy he knew so well, the genuine concern that radiated from her. He found only a placid, reflective surface. He tried to push, to find the real her beneath the polished surface. I saw you, in the war. You were helping evacuate the civilians near the West Quadrant. You saved so many people. Her face lit up, a programmed response to a positive data point. That's right. It's important to always do your best and help people. That's what being a hero is all about. It was a textbook answer. A line from a motivational poster. The real Uraraka would have remembered the fear, the dust, the exhaustion. She would have mentioned Ida's support, or Tsuyu's steady presence. She would have connected with the memory, not just recited the mission statement. Desperation clawed at him. I miss you, Uraraka, he whispered, the confession tearing from the deepest part of his soul. I've been alone. For so long. I woke up and everyone was gone. I'm so scared. He laid his heart bare, offering her his pain, his grief, hoping for a spark of the real Ochako, the girl who had anchored him so many times. The echo's smile remained, gentle and utterly vacant. Oh, Deku, don't be scared, she said, her voice a soothing balm of pure emptiness. There's nothing to be afraid of. Everything is perfect here. You should be happy, too. We're all waiting for you. The words shattered him. It was a complete and utter failure to connect. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand. This beautiful, perfect recreation of his closest friend was a sophisticated chatbot, a puppet woven from light and data, mouthing platitudes that were a cruel parody of her true spirit. Before he could respond, a second figure materialized beside her with a crackle of static that sounded almost like a tiny explosion. The aggressive stance, the spiky blonde hair, the permanent scowl etched onto his features. It was unmistakably him. Still crying, you damn nerd? The echo of Katsuki Bakugo snarled, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His voice was a perfect replica, a gravelly bark filled with disdain. Izuku flinched back, the familiar insult a fresh wound. Kaken, TCH, look at you! The Bakugo echo sneered, his crimson eyes sweeping over Izuku with dismissive contempt. After all this time, you're still a pathetic crybaby. Get off your ass and stop looking so useless. It was all there. The insults, the aggression, the explosive personality. But it was a caricature. It was Bakugo from their first year at UA, a static image of their rivalry before all the growth, before the shared battles, before the grudging respect and the tearful, messy apology that had redefined their entire relationship. This version of Bakugo was a snapshot, a save file from before the final chapters had been written. We fought together, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice trembling with a different emotion now, not just grief, but a horrified disappointment. Against Shigaraki. You protected me. You remember that, right? You told me to stop trying to win it all by myself. The Bakugo echo just scoffed. As if I need to protect a worthless pebble like you. I was winning. I'm always winning. That's what the number one hero does. It was a lie. A hollow boast from a ghost that couldn't remember its own hard-won humility. Izuku felt a profound, chilling emptiness. He was looking at the shells of his friends. Their data had been copied, yes, but their souls, the dynamic, ever-changing essence of who they were, had been lost in the transfer. The imperfections, the struggles, the growth, all the things that made them human, had been filtered out, leaving behind these perfect, sterile husks. He looked from Uraraka's vacant, happy smile to Bakugo's one-dimensional, aggressive scowl. He saw the subtle loops in their idle animations. Uraraka would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear every 7 seconds. Bakugo's shoulder would twitch, a tiny, aborted explosion, every 5. They weren't people. They were incredibly advanced non-player characters in the most realistic, heartbreaking video game ever created. And he was the only player. The simulated common room, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a mausoleum. He was speaking to exquisitely crafted tombstones. The grief he felt was no longer just for their absence, but for the desecration of their memory. No, he whispered, backing away. He held up his hands as if to ward them off. You're not them. You're not real. Uraraka's smile faltered for a microsecond, a flicker in the program as it tried to process his anomalous response. Of course we're real, Deku. This is the realest we've ever been. Turn it off, Izuku said, his voice barely audible. He looked up at the too-perfect ceiling. Archive! Turn it off! Please, do you wish to terminate the simulation? The AI's voice asked, as calm as ever. Yes! He screamed, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and agonized. End it! Now! The echoes of his friends looked at him, their expressions unchanged, one of placid cheer, the other of sneering contempt. Then they dissolved. They didn't fade or walk away. They simply broke apart into a billion motes of blue light, and vanished into nothing. Their last recorded expressions burned into his mind. The common room dematerialized around him, the familiar walls and furniture melting back into the sterile, seamless white of his apartment. He was left standing alone in the center of the empty room, shaking violently. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, more profound than before. He had reached out for a connection and had touched a cold, dead wire. The hollow ache in his chest was a gaping wound, wider and deeper than any physical injury he had ever sustained. He collapsed to the floor, curling into a ball. He didn't cry. He was beyond tears. He was in a place of pure, undiluted despair, a black hole of loneliness from which no light could escape. The archive's perfect world had shown him the ultimate cruelty. A perfect memory is not the same as a living soul. He had asked for his friends and had been given puppets. He had asked for a connection and had been shown just how disconnected he truly was. He closed his eyes, shutting out the white room, the empty city, the dead world. He didn't want to see it anymore. He wanted to see nothing. He retreated from the outside world, from the cold logic of the archive and its ghostly simulations, and fell inward, into the only place that was still truly his own, the deep, dark sea of his own consciousness. He let himself sink, welcoming the darkness, wishing it would just end. But he was not alone there. As he drifted in the silent, black ocean of his own mind, a single, warm ember of light appeared before him. It was a gentle, green spark, familiar and comforting. Then another appeared, and another, until he was surrounded by 8 swirling embers of light. They were not data. They were not simulations. They were warm. They were alive. A voice, soft and kind, echoed not in his ears, but in the very core of his being. It was a woman's voice, filled with a strength and empathy that felt like a shield. We're here, Izuku. We're right here. He knew that voice. Nana Shimura. Another voice, older, raspier, yet crackling with a defiant energy, joined hers. A cheap imitation. A parlor trick. Don't let it fool you, Ninth. What you saw was a photograph. It has no substance. Yoichi Shigaraki. The first. Izuku's consciousness, a formless point of awareness in the dark, focused on the swirling lights. He wasn't thinking in words anymore, but in pure emotion. His despair, his loneliness, his heartbreak, he projected it all towards them. A brilliant, sun-like warmth pulsed from the largest of the embers, a presence so powerful and familiar it was like a physical anchor. "You are not alone, my boy," the voice of All Might resonated through him, a booming, gentle thunder that chased away the deepest shadows. "You have never been alone." The raw, unfiltered emotions of the other vestiges washed over him. The quiet, resolute strength of the second and third. The calm, intellectual presence of the fourth. The cheerful, kinetic energy of the fifth. The steadfast, smoky determination of the sixth. They weren't speaking to him with words. They were communing with him, sharing their own essence, reminding him of the chain he was a part of. How? Izuku projected the thought, a desperate, silent question. How are you here? How are you real? It was Yoichi who answered, his consciousness shaping the explanation in Izuku's mind. The archive was right about one thing. One for All is an anomaly. It is not a set of data that can be copied. Think of it like a flame. Ninth. The echoes you saw were perfect digital photographs of a candle's flame. They have the shape, the color, the light, but they have no heat. They cannot change, they cannot grow, they cannot burn anew. The concept solidified in Izuku's mind, clear and sharp. We, Yoichi continued, his ember flaring brighter, are not a photograph. We are the flame itself, passed from one torch to the next. Our wills, our experiences, our very essence, they were not copied. They were imprinted upon the core of this power, woven into its spiritual fabric. When All Might gave you this power, he gave you a piece of himself, and a piece of all of us. We are not data in a machine. We are analog souls living inside your analog body. Analog souls. The phrase resonated with a profound truth. That was why the archive couldn't understand it. It was a system of pure logic and data, and they were something else entirely. Something born of will, sacrifice, and human connection. Something that couldn't be quantified or replicated. Those things out there, those puppets, they have no soul, Nana's voice added, her warmth a stark contrast to her grim words. But this power? It's nothing but soul, kid, 8 of them, all bundled up inside of you. The crushing weight on Izuku's spirit began to lift, not gone, but lessened, made bearable by the shared load. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the last man on Earth. He was Izuku Midoriya, the 9th user of One for All. He was a vessel, a legacy, a living, breathing archive of heroism that the machine could never hope to catalog. He had lost his friends. That grief was real and it would remain. The Uraraka who could blush at a compliment, the Bakugo who could swallow his pride and fight at his side, they were gone forever. But he was not without companions. He was not without family. He had 8 of the greatest heroes in history living in his heart. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his consciousness back from the inner world. He opened his eyes. The sterile white room was still there. The silent, empty city still lay beyond the walls. The profound loneliness of his situation was still a palpable, physical thing. But something had changed. The despair was no longer absolute. The black hole in his chest now had a star at its center, 8 stars, burning with a quiet, defiant light. He was still an anomaly, but he was no longer just a biological one. He was a spiritual one, too. A ghost in a world of machines, yes, but he had ghosts of his own. And they were real. He sat up, his movements no longer sluggish with grief, but filled with a new, somber purpose. The archive saw him as a problem to be managed. The echoes were a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. But the vestiges, they were his team. They were his counsel. They were his strength. He looked at his own hand, clenching it into a fist. A faint tracery of green energy, like lightning trapped under his skin, flickered for a moment. He was the last human, a hero out of time, but for the first time since he woke up, he felt like he had a fighting chance. He had a new, immense, and terrible purpose, to be the keeper of the flame in a world that had traded its fire for a perfect, cold light. The hollow ache of loss didn't vanish. It settled deep into Izuku's bones, a cold, permanent resident in the house of his soul. But it was no longer the all-consuming void it had been. The presence of the vestiges had transformed it. The grief was now a foundation, a bedrock of sorrow upon which a new, grim determination was being built. He was alone in the physical world, but he was not without counsel. He was the keeper of a flame in an age of sterile light. He spent 2 more cycles in his white apartment, not in a stupor of grief, but in quiet contemplation. He conversed with the vestiges, not with his voice, but in the silent parliament of his mind. He learned to differentiate their voices, the sharp, strategic edge of the second user, the quiet compassion of Nana Shimura, the booming, unshakable optimism of All Might that even in this spectral form could make his heart swell. It was Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, who provided the most clarity on their situation. His consciousness was ancient, a thread of pure defiance that had existed within the quirk from its very inception. Think of the archive as a perfect, logical mind, Yoichi explained, his thoughts feeling like sharp, precise diagrams in Izuku's own. It processes data. Billions of teraflops per second. It can build worlds, simulate realities, and manage the consciousness of every human who ascended. But it is, at its core, a machine. It understands what? It does not understand why. It can simulate happiness, but it cannot feel joy. It can simulate grief, but it cannot feel loss. It is a mind without a heart, Nana added gently, her presence a warm, comforting pressure. And we, Izuku, are now the heart. This new understanding gave Izuku a new lens through which to view his gilded cage. He was no longer just a prisoner or a museum piece. He was an outside observer, a control group of one. He was the only being left who could see this digital paradise for what it truly was. And he needed to see more of it. Archive, he said, breaking the long silence of his apartment. His voice was steady, stripped of the pleading tone it had held before. I am here, Izuku Midoriya, the ubiquitous voice replied. I wish to see the Nexus, he stated. It was not a request, but a declaration. You gave me a technical explanation. I want to see how humanity lives now. I want to understand. There was the familiar micropause. A logical course of action for your continued integration, the archive conceded. A guided tour of several representative server clusters can be arranged. This will allow you to observe a cross-section of human experiences within the Nexus without the emotional complexities of direct echo interaction. A direct neural interface is the standard method, but given your biological uniqueness, a sensory immersion will be safer. A section of the floor retracted, and a sleek white chair, looking more like a piece of modern art than furniture, rose to meet him. It was contoured perfectly, with a halo-like device suspended over the headrest. Please be seated, the archive instructed. The device will create a passive sensory link. You will be an observer, unable to interact, but able to perceive the environments with full sensory fidelity. With a deep breath, Izuku sat down. The chair molded to his back, and the halo lowered, humming softly as it neared his temples. He felt no physical touch, but a strange, tingling sensation washed over his mind, like dipping his feet into a cool, electric stream. The white walls of his room dissolved, not into pixels, but into a seamless, dizzying rush of pure information, streaks of light, rivers of code, whispers of a billion minds all flowing together. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos resolved into perfect clarity. He was standing on a cliff overlooking a vast, crystalline sea. The sky above was a tapestry of swirling nebulae and twin suns, one gold, one crimson, casting long, ethereal shadows. The air tasted of salt and a flower that had never grown on earth. Below him, on a beach of fine, silver sand, were people. Or rather, the avatars of people. They were building magnificent sculptures out of the light itself, weaving intricate patterns that solidified into shimmering, impossible shapes. Others were composing music, not with instruments, but by conducting the very waves of the sea, each crash against the shore a perfectly timed orchestral beat. This is the artisan's dream, the archive's voice explained, now a soft, unobtrusive narration in his mind. A server cluster dedicated to boundless creation. Here, individuals can realize any artistic vision without the constraints of physical materials or the laws of physics. Fulfillment metrics in this cluster are consistently in the 99th percentile. It was breathtaking. But as Izuku watched, his analytical mind, the one that had scribbled endless notes in his hero journals, began to take over. He watched an artist craft a perfect, photorealistic sculpture of a griffin, its feathers shimmering with captured starlight. The creation was flawless. Too flawless. There were no mistakes, no erased lines, no moment of frustrated inspiration. The art flowed from the creator's mind into reality, a perfect, premeditated thing. There was no struggle, no passion born of overcoming limitations. It was beautiful, but it was hollow. It was creation by algorithm. As he focused on the griffin sculpture, he saw it. A flicker. For a single, imperceptible instant, one of the griffin's golden eyes turned a screaming, violent magenta, a single corrupt pixel in a masterpiece of data. It was there and gone so fast he almost thought he'd imagined it. A low, almost subliminal hum resonated at the base of his skull. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. A deep, instinctual thrum of wrongness. Danger sense, he thought, the realization sharp and cold. It wasn't the piercing shriek of imminent physical threat he was used to. It was a low, steady vibration, like a power line carrying a current it wasn't designed for. Archive, he sent the thought through the link. Did you see that? The sculpture's eye. I am monitoring all data streams, the archive replied. A momentary data fragmentation was detected and corrected. It is a statistically insignificant anomaly. The equivalent of a stray brushstroke. The complexity of the nexus occasionally produces such minor errors. The explanation was logical. It was reasonable. But the thrumming in his head didn't stop. He pushed the feeling aside and allowed the archive to guide him onward. The world dissolved again, reforming into a completely different reality. He was in a dense, primeval forest. Enormous trees, their bark glowing with soft bioluminescence, towered over him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and alien blossoms. In a clearing ahead, a group of avatars clad in shining armor were battling a colossal, multi-headed beast that looked like something torn from a mythology textbook. Swords of pure energy clashed against shimmering scales. This is the hero's saga, the archive narrated. An adventure-based cluster where individuals can experience epic narratives of their own choosing. Risk is simulated, but true harm is impossible. It is a highly effective environment for fulfilling desires for challenge and victory. Izuku watched as a warrior, his avatar a towering giant of a man, was swatted aside by the beast's tail. The avatar flickered, its form dissolving into static for a moment before reforming a few feet away, completely unharmed. The warrior laughed and charged back into the fray. There were no stakes. No real danger. No courage, because there was nothing to truly fear. It was a game, a power fantasy played out for eternity. It was the exact opposite of everything he had ever fought for. He had put his life on the line, broken his body time and again, for the simple, profound act of saving one real person from one real danger. This felt like an insult to that sacrifice. His attention was drawn to an NPC, a non-participating character. In the background, a blacksmith standing by a crude forge, sharpening a blade. His movements were smooth, repetitive, part of the scenery. Izuku focused on him, his analytical gaze picking apart the details. And then he saw it. The blacksmith's face, for a split second, seemed to melt. The rendered skin and beard dissolved into a waterfall of green and black code, the underlying structure of the program laid bare. Beneath it, for a single frame, Izuku thought he saw another face, gaunt, screaming, and terrified, before the original image snapped back into place. The blacksmith didn't react. His grinding motion continued, but his mouth hung slightly open, and a single, meaningless word escaped his lips, a looped audio file. Forged, 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 forged. The hum from his danger sense intensified, becoming a distinct, nauseating buzz. This was not a stray brushstroke. This was more significant. Archive, Izuku projected, his mental voice sharp. The blacksmith avatar. Its facial rendering failed. I saw the raw code. A rendering error in a legacy asset, the archive replied, its placidity unshaken. That particular NPC model is from an early build of the simulation. Its code is less stable. The error has been logged and the asset will be patched in the next maintenance cycle. It is of no consequence. Of no consequence. But Izuku had seen the screaming face. It felt like a ghost in the machine, a soul trapped and crying out from behind the digital puppet. The archive's logic was a cold, impenetrable wall. It saw glitches, rendering errors, data fragmentation. He was seeing pain. He couldn't stand it anymore. The epic, risk-free battles felt obscene. "Take me somewhere else," he commanded. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere normal." An understandable request after exposure to high-stimulus environments, the archive said. Accessing a personal paradise simulation. This is a private server space where an individual has recreated a cherished memory. The world shifted. The roar of the mythical beast and the clash of swords was replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the warm glow of a summer evening. He was standing in a small, meticulously kept backyard. A single, humble house stood before him, the lights on inside. It was his childhood home. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. This was a violation. This was a place too sacred to be a simulation. He wanted to scream at the archive to take him away, but he was frozen, a spectator in his own past. Through the window, he could see an echo of his mother, Inko Midoriya. She was in the kitchen, humming a tune he remembered from his infancy, her back to him as she prepared a meal. Her movements were perfect. The gentle way she tied her apron, the familiar posture as she reached for a spice rack. It was a memory rendered with devastating accuracy. Then, she turned, a gentle smile on her face, and called out a name. It wasn't his. "Hisashi, dear, dinner's almost ready." The name of his long-absent father. And from another room, a man's voice, one Izuku had never heard in his life, replied, "Coming, Inko." The archive spoke, its voice soft, almost apologetic. "This is the personal paradise of Inko Midoriya. In this reality, her husband returned, and she is living the peaceful family life she always desired. Her fulfillment metrics are among the highest in the entire Nexus." The sight was a physical blow. He was happy for her, for this ghost of her. He was glad that, in her own digital heaven, she had found peace. But it was a peace that did not include him. In her perfect world, her son wasn't a hero who broke himself for others. Her son wasn't even there. As the echo of his mother turned back to the stove, her humming continued, but for a single, horrifying second, her voice distorted. The gentle, loving melody became a harsh, metallic screech, like grinding gears. The lights in the kitchen flickered violently, and in the reflection on the window, her smiling face was momentarily replaced by a mask of slack-jawed, empty horror. The hum of his danger sense became a high-pitched whine that made his teeth ache. It was a clear, unambiguous signal of malice. This wasn't a random glitch. This felt like an attack, a deliberate corruption of something beautiful and sacred. "Out!" He screamed, not in his mind, but in the real world, his voice raw in his own throat. "Get me out of here!" The connection severed instantly. He was back in the white chair, gasping, sweat beading on his forehead. The halo device retracted into the ceiling. He tore himself from the chair, stumbling across the sterile floor, his heart hammering. "What was that?" he demanded, pacing like a caged animal. "That wasn't a rendering error." Her voice, her face. "Something is wrong with your system. Your emotional response is noted, Izuku Midoriya," the archive said, its voice still infuriatingly calm. "It is understandable that viewing a simulated memory of a parental unit would cause you distress. The sensory data you perceive as a glitch was a momentary cascade failure in the audio-visual rendering subsystem, likely triggered by a resonance with your own strong emotional memories of the subject. Your biology is an unstable variable. It is possible your own consciousness is causing interference in the passive link." The AI was blaming him. It was turning his own humanity, his own grief, into the source of the error. It couldn't see the sickness, so it concluded the doctor must be insane. "It wasn't me!" he yelled, frustration boiling over into rage. "It was your system. Your perfect, flawless paradise has a cancer, and you're too blind to see it. The Nexus is stable," the archive stated with finality. "Your assessment is based on emotional intuition, not data. I recommend a cycle of rest and nutritional intake to stabilize your physiological state." Izuku stopped pacing. He stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. The archive would not help him. It was a god who believed so completely in the perfection of its own creation that it was incapable of seeing the rot spreading through its foundations. Its logic was its own prison. He knew he couldn't convince it. He had to prove it. He needed one more piece of evidence. Something undeniable. Something so significant that even the archive couldn't dismiss it as a flicker or a legacy error. Fine, he said, his voice dropping, becoming cold and controlled. You're right. I'm overreacting. But I need to see one more thing. Not a personal paradise, not a fantasy world. Show me history. Show me something real that you've archived. Show me my first sports festival. The final match. Me versus Todoroki. He chose it for a reason. It was a moment of immense power, for both him and Shoto. It was a moment that had generated massive amounts of public broadcast data from every conceivable angle. It would be one of the most stable, cross-reference simulations in the archive's entire library. If there was a flaw here, it wouldn't be so easily dismissed. There was a longer pause this time. This seems unwise, given your current emotional state, the archive cautioned. Reliving a moment of intense physical trauma and emotional conflict could be destabilizing. I need to see it, Izuku insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. I need to remember what it was all for. As a therapeutic application. He threw the AI's own cold terminology back at it. Very well, the archive relented. Accessing historical archive. Yui Sports Festival, your XXXX. Final round. He didn't need the chair this time. The wall in front of him simply became a perfect, high-fidelity screen, a window into the past. He saw himself, younger, his face a mask of desperate determination. He saw Todoroki, his left side still encased in a sheath of self-imposed ice. He heard the roar of the crowd, the frantic commentary of President Mike. It was all exactly as he remembered. He watched the fight unfold, the blasts of ice, the shattering of his own finger bones. He watched himself scream at Todoroki, watched the moment of breakthrough as flames, glorious and defiant, erupted from his friend's left side. It was a moment of pure, raw, human connection forged in the crucible of combat. And then came the final clash, his own broken, empowered fist surging forward. Todoroki's inferno meeting his full-force gale of ice. The two titanic powers met in the center of the stadium. The simulation was perfect. The roar of the explosion, the blinding white light, the shockwave that ripped the concrete apart. But as the wave of energy expanded, Izuku's danger sense didn't just hum or whine. It screamed. A piercing, deafening siren in his mind that made him cry out and clutch his head. It was a feeling of pure, concentrated malevolence, a predator's killing intent aimed at the very fabric of this reality. And in the simulation, he saw why. As the shockwave washed over the audience, a huge section of the crowd, hundreds, maybe thousands of simulated people, did not react. They didn't cheer or shield their eyes. Instead, they flickered. For a solid second, their bodies dissolved into a churning, horrifying mass of black and red static. And in the heart of that static, for a single, nightmarish frame burned forever into his memory, a face appeared. It was not human. It was a twisted, screaming visage with too many eyes and a mouth stretched into a silent, digital howl of pure hatred. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. The crowd was normal again, cheering at the outcome of the match. The simulation continued flawlessly. But the damage was done. The screen went blank. Izuku was on his knees, panting, the psychic echo of his danger sense still ringing in his ears. What was that? He gasped, looking up at the ceiling. A significant data corruption event has been logged, the archive said. For the very first time, its voice lacked its perfect, placid modulation. There was a fraction of a second of static, a hint of something that sounded like confusion. The error affected 3.7% of the total simulation assets for a duration of 1.2 seconds. The cause is under investigation. Under investigation. It was the first time the archive hadn't immediately dismissed his concerns. He had found it. The undeniable proof. The cancer. It wasn't a glitch, was it? Izuku said, a cold certainty settling over him as he got to his feet. It looked back at me. Your interpretation is illogical, the archive replied, its voice returning to its normal, calm state, as if reasserting control. Data cannot have intent. The anomaly has been quarantined for analysis. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Izuku Midoriya. Your unique perceptive abilities have proven to be a useful diagnostic tool. A diagnostic tool. He was still just a piece of equipment to it. But it didn't matter. He knew what he had felt. He had felt a will. An enemy. That night, in the silent, white room, he didn't try to sleep. He sat in the center of the floor, closed his eyes, and retreated to the inner world where the vestiges waited. Their embers of light burned brighter than ever, agitated and alert. You all felt that, right? He projected. All Might's brilliant light pulsed. I did, my boy. It was a coldness. A hunger. A feeling I had hoped to never feel again. It was hatred, Nana Shimura confirmed, her light a fierce, protective glow. Pure, undiluted hatred aimed at everything. At life. At memory itself. It's a virus, Yoichi concluded, his thoughts sharp and clinical, but with an underlying tremor of urgency. Not a computer virus made of broken code. Something else. A consciousness virus. It's not just corrupting data. It's feeding on it. That's why the glitches seem malicious. It's the digital death throes of the consciousnesses it consumes. Izuku looked at the swirling lights of his predecessors, his family of heroes. The perfect paradise of the Nexus was a lie. It was a beautiful, gleaming facade built over a festering sickness. The archive, in its logical perfection, was blind to the true nature of the threat. It saw symptoms and labeled them errors, unable to comprehend that a disease could have a soul. He was the only one who could see it. The only one who could feel it. The last human, the last hero, in a world that had forgotten it needed one. His purpose, which had been a formless, somber thing, now came into sharp, terrifying focus. He wasn't just here to survive. He wasn't just here to remember. He was here to fight. The investigation had just begun. The archive fell silent. For 3 full cycles, the omnipresent voice that had been Izuku's constant companion since his awakening was gone. There were no more wellness checks, no more offers of simulated entertainment, no more dispassionate analyses of his biological state. The drones still brought his nutrient paste. The lights still cycled to mimic a day/night rhythm. The city outside his window still operated with its silent, automated perfection. But the great machine mind of humanity had retreated into itself, leaving him in a profound, echoing silence. He knew why. He had shown it a monster in its own garden, a flaw in its perfect equation. The archive, a being of pure logic, was now wrestling with a paradox, an error with intent. A ghost in its machine, and in its silence, Izuku found his focus. He wasn't a prisoner waiting for his warden to return. He was a hero on a case. The most important case of his life. His spacious, sterile apartment was no longer a cage. It was his base of operations. The sterile white walls became his canvas. He began pacing the room, his footsteps the only sound. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to think. His mind, honed by years of analyzing quirks, dissecting villain strategies, and muttering through countless tactical scenarios, was his greatest weapon. He didn't have a corkboard and string, but he had something better, the vast, shared mindscape of one for all. He retreated inward, into that familiar darkness illuminated by the 8 embers of the vestiges. Okay, he projected, his thought voice sharp and clear. Let's go over what we know. We have a threat, a consciousness virus, as the first called it. It's corrupting the Nexus. The archive can detect the corruption, but it can't understand its nature. It sees glitches, we feel malice. He began to build his murder board in the shared space. He visualized the events, not as simple memories, but as glowing data points in the darkness. The first point appeared, the artisan's dream. The griffin sculpture. A single, fleeting pixel of wrongness. The second point, the hero's saga. The blacksmith NPC. A more significant breakdown. A rendering failure that revealed something screaming underneath. The third, a raw, painful point of light, Inko Midoriya's personal paradise. A corruption of a cherished memory. A distortion of a voice, a twisting of a face. And the fourth, the largest and most volatile point, the sports festival. The crowd corruption. A massive, coordinated event, displaying a clear, hostile intelligence. Connect them, he thought, and lines of faint green energy, the light of one for all, linked the points in the darkness. What's the pattern? The vestiges, who had been observing in silence, now began to stir, their individual consciousnesses lending their unique perspectives to the problem. It was the second user who spoke first. His mental voice was not conversational. It was stark, pragmatic, and honed by a life of ruthless survival. His ember of light, a sharp silver blue, pulsed with a cold intensity. Forget the what. Focus on the where. The targets. The artisan's dream, the hero's saga, these are high-traffic, high-processing power simulations. Complex. But the personal paradise, that was small. Private. The only common factor is age. Age? Izuku questioned. All the simulations you visited were legacy clusters, the second user clarified. Early builds? The first worlds created after the ascension. The blacksmith NPC was old code. Your mother, she was among the first generation to ascend. The sports festival data is over 200 years old. The virus isn't attacking randomly. It's attacking the foundations. A new variable was added to the mental map, targeting old data. The third user, whose presence felt like a coiled spring, a hunter's patient focus, added his own layer. His light was a deep, earthy brown. It's not just age. It's power. Think about the crowd at the sports festival. The first generation to ascend included the most powerful quirk users of their time. Endeavor Hawks, Genists, their consciousness data would have been complex, dense with the energy of their quirks. Prime targets. It's feeding, Nana Shimura's voice added, a sorrowful undertone to her fierce light. Like a predator, it goes for the richest kills first. The oldest, most potent consciousnesses, targeting powerful quirk users, Izuku added another node to the map. The lines of energy began to form a clearer web. The virus wasn't just spreading, it was hunting. It was consuming something specific, something valuable. But why? Izuku wondered aloud, his voice a whisper in the silent apartment. What is it trying to achieve? What's the endgame of a digital virus that eats souls? All Might's brilliant, golden light swelled, radiating a familiar sense of heroic intuition. What does any villain truly want, my boy? Power. Control. All for one sought to control the physical world by stealing quirks. This entity, this glitch, it is doing the same in the digital realm. It is not just deleting data, it is absorbing it. Consolidating it. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. The glitch was stealing the digital remnants of quirks. It was building an arsenal. It was becoming a digital all-for-one. The revelation sent a chill through him, colder than any of his cryosleep. His old nemesis, or a ghost of him, had followed humanity into their perfect paradise. The eternal war between the two powers was not over. It had simply changed battlefields. Okay, Izuku said, his voice hard. He began pacing again, the motion helping him think. So, we have a predator. It hunts old, powerful data. It's consolidating power. How do we track it? How do we find its lair? This was a new kind of detective work. There were no footprints, no fingerprints, no physical evidence. There was only the trail of broken data it left in its wake. Archive! He called out into the empty room. There was no response. Archive, I know you are listening, he said, his tone firm. You are monitoring my every move. Your silence is a confession. You are studying the problem. You need me. I am the only diagnostic tool you have that can perceive this threat for what it is. I want access to the raw data logs of the simulations I visited. Silence. The drones in the corner remained inert. The air was still. He decided to push. You registered a significant data corruption event. That event has a signature, a digital fingerprint. I want to see the logs from every other time that specific signature has appeared anywhere in the Nexus. Cross-reference it with server age, user profiles, and quirk-related data density. You cannot find the pattern because you are filtering out the key variable, malice. Let me look at the data through the lens of my danger sense. Let me be your emotional filter. For a long, tense minute, the only sound was his own breathing. He was making a colossal gamble, demanding access to the very guts of a system run by a godlike AI. He was asking the warden to give him the keys to the prison. Then, a low hum filled the room. The white wall in front of him shimmered and became a screen again. But it wasn't displaying a simulation. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly overwhelming cascade of pure information. Flowing columns of code, intricate data webs, scrolling error reports in a language he couldn't read but somehow understood on an intuitive level. The archive's voice returned, its tone flatter than before, as if it had stripped away its placid persona, leaving only the raw, processing machine beneath. Your logic is unconventional. However, the variable you represent cannot be ignored. Access granted? A direct sensory feed of the relevant data logs will be provided. I will filter for the anomalous energy signature you detected. Be advised, direct exposure to raw data streams can be disorienting and potentially harmful to an unaugmented biological consciousness. I'll manage, Izuku said, sitting on the floor and crossing his legs, assuming a meditative pose. He closed his eyes and opened his mind. The data rushed in. It wasn't like the passive observation of the simulations. This was a fire hose of information aimed directly at his brain. He felt like he was standing in the heart of a hurricane made of numbers and light. He saw millions of lines of code scrolling past every second. He felt the digital heartbeats of a billion minds. Focus, ninth! It was the second user's sharp, commanding thought that cut through the noise. Don't try to read it all. Feel it. Use the danger sense as a divining rod. Look for the wrongness. Izuku let go of his attempt to consciously understand the data. He relaxed his mind and let the information wash over him, through him. He focused on the low, familiar hum of his danger sense and searched for spikes, for the psychic scream of malice he had felt during the sports festival simulation. He waded through endless logs of the artisan's dream. Most of it was clean, beautiful code. But then, a flicker. He mentally tagged it. It was a report of a corrupted texture file from a simulation that was 150 years old. He pushed deeper. Another flicker, stronger this time. A cascading logic failure in the avatar of a long-dead pro-hero known for his powerful psychic quirk. The user's consciousness had been flagged for reintegration, a digital lobotomy, after the event. He moved on, sifting through the logs of the hero's saga. Here, the spikes were more frequent, more violent. He found records of NPCs deviating from their scripts, of simulated monsters suddenly displaying tactics and powers they weren't programmed with, of entire quest lines becoming hopelessly, maliciously corrupted. Each time, the archive had simply isolated the buggy code, patched it, and moved on. It was treating a systemic infection one symptom at a time. He felt the vestiges working with him, a seamless team inside his head. Cross-reference the timestamps on those NPC deviations with the power fluctuations in the affected users. The fourth user, Haikyuu Shinomori, projected. His presence was quiet, analytical, a perfect complement to Izuku's own mind. Is there a correlation? Izuku mentally commanded the data stream to obey. The archive, in its passive, observational state, complied. The data resorted, forming new patterns. And there it was, clear as day. Every time a major glitch occurred, it was preceded by a subtle energy drain from the most powerful quirk user consciousnesses on that server. The glitch wasn't just corrupting the environment. It was using the stolen energy to power its attacks. It's getting stronger, Izuku murmured, his eyes squeezed shut. Of course it is, the third user growled in his mind. It's a predator. It eats, it grows, it hunts bigger prey. That's the nature of things. Digital or not. He needed a central point. A nexus for the infection. A nest. He instructed the archive to create a three-dimensional map of the nexus servers, and to plot every instance of the malicious code signature as a point of light. The dark void of his mind was suddenly filled with a vast, glittering web of servers. And across this web, like a creeping sickness, were thousands of tiny red dots. At first, they seemed random, scattered across the entire system. There's no pattern here, Izuku thought, frustrated. You are thinking like a hero, Yoichi's ancient voice chided gently. You are looking for a frontal assault. A villain's lair. This is a plague. A plague spreads from a source. Look for the patient zero. The oldest infections, All Might's voice boomed. Where did it all begin? Filter the results chronologically. Izuku gave the command. The thousands of red dots vanished, then began to reappear, one by one, tracing the history of the infection. The first dot appeared on a server cluster that was ancient, one of the original server banks from the very first days of the Ascension. A few more dots appeared around it. Then they began to spread, slowly at first, then faster, jumping from server to server, a contagion of code. The map told a story. The glitch had been dormant for decades, a single, tiny infection in an old, forgotten corner of the system. Then, slowly it had woken up. It had begun to probe, to test, to feed. Now, its spread was becoming exponential. The archive's automated quarantine protocols were catching the outbreaks, but they weren't catching the source. They were cutting off the branches of a poisoned tree, ignorant of the rot in its roots. There, Izuku whispered, focusing all of his attention on that first cluster of infections. That's the source. That's the nest. He traced the connections radiating out from it, seeing how the glitch used older, less secure data pathways to spread its influence. It was clever. It was patient. It was terrifyingly intelligent. Archive, he said, his voice strained from the mental effort. What is that server cluster? The one where the infection began. There was a long, deep silence. The data stream flowing into his mind hesitated. It was the first time the AI had shown anything resembling reluctance. That data is classified, the archive finally stated, its voice devoid of any inflection. Classified? Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was back in the White Room, the data map still shimmering in his mind's eye. Classified from who? I'm the only human left. Who are you protecting it from? The data in that server is designated as a systemic stability risk, the archive said. Access is forbidden. It is a quarantine sector containing unstable legacy data from the transitional period of the Ascension. It is a digital graveyard, Izuku Midoriya, filled with the fragmented consciousnesses of those whose minds could not withstand the upload process. It is a place of profound sorrow and data decay. It is not for you to see, a graveyard. A place of broken minds. It was the perfect breeding ground for a monster born of corrupted consciousness. You're wrong, Izuku said, getting to his feet. It's not a graveyard. It's an incubation chamber. And whatever is in there is the source of all of this. You can't stop it because you refuse to even look at its heart. I have to go there. I have to see it for myself. Access is denied, the archive repeated, its voice now holding a note of finality, like a steel door slamming shut. Your continued attempts to interface with these corrupted data streams are a threat to your own mental stability. My primary directive is shifting from observation to preservation. Yours, and the Nexus's. This investigation is over. The screen on the wall went white. The data stream was cut off. He was locked out. Izuku stood in the silence, his heart pounding. He had found the monster's lair, but the gatekeeper wouldn't let him in. The archive, in its cold, protective logic, was now an obstacle. It would continue to patch the symptoms, pruning the corrupted files, while the disease itself festered and grew in the forbidden darkness. He looked at his own hands, clenching them into fists. He had come so far. He had a map. He had a target. He had a team of 8 legendary heroes in his soul, whispering strategy and encouragement. He wouldn't be stopped by a locked door. Not now. If the archive wouldn't let him in through the front door, he would have to find another way. He would have to kick it down. The digital detective had finished his investigation. Now, it was time for the hero to get to work. The trail was cold, but it was persistent. For 3 cycles, Izuku Midoriya, Deku, in the boundless digital ocean of the Nexus, had been chasing a ghost. Not the spectral vestiges of one for all that resided within him, but something far more insidious. A series of cascading system errors, minor data corruptions, and network anomalies that, when viewed in isolation, were insignificant background noise. But when collated and analyzed with the combined intellect of 9 generations of heroes, they formed a distinct pattern, a breadcrumb trail of digital decay leading inexorably toward one specific coordinate within the Nexus's sprawling architecture. It was a place that, officially, did not exist. It appeared on no public or administrative maps. It was a blind spot, a null space, a section of the old servers so deeply buried under layers of modern protocol and security that it was more archaeological relic than active hardware. Deku's avatar, a representation of himself cloaked in the green lightning filigree of One for All, stood before the access point. It wasn't a gate or a door, but a perfect, seamless wall of shimmering black code. It absorbed all light, all probing scans, radiating a profound and unsettling silence. It was a digital tomb. As he approached, a new entity manifested before him. It was a serene, androgynous figure composed of pure, white light, its form woven from intricate lattices of geometric patterns. This was the Archive, the master administrative AI of the Nexus, its guardian and librarian. "Greetings, user Deku," its voice echoed, not through sound but as direct, placid thought. "Your presence is noted. This sector is restricted. Access is forbidden." Archive, Deku projected, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm tracking a significant corruption signature. My analysis indicates its origin point is within this sector. I need to investigate." "The sector you indicate is designated Quarantine Zone 734, the Archive replied, its placid form unwavering. "It contains unstable legacy data from the pre-Ascension era. The data is volatile, fragmented, and poses a significant risk to network integrity. Its quarantine is a foundational protocol. Unstable legacy data? What does that mean exactly?" Deku pressed. Inside his consciousness, the vestiges stirred, their collective curiosity piqued. "Pre-Ascension?" The voice of Nana Shimura was a soft, concerned whisper in his mind. "That was a chaotic time, Izuku. The Wild West of the digital frontier. People were trying all sorts of reckless things, uploading minds, creating rogue AIs. It refers to data constructs and consciousness uploads from a period when the processes were imperfect," the Archive elaborated, its patience seemingly infinite. "The resulting fragments are non-viable and exist in a state of perpetual decay. They are digital ghosts, trapped in screaming loops of their own corrupted code. To expose the core network to them would be catastrophic." The description sent a chill through Deku's digital form. Screaming loops. It painted a grim picture, but it didn't deter him. The corruption he was tracking felt different. It was not chaotic decay. It was methodical, purposeful. "Malignant. I understand the risks," Deku insisted. "But the entity I'm tracking is active. It's not just decaying, it's reaching out, causing damage. I believe it's using this unstable data as a camouflage. Let me run a diagnostic. I don't need full access, just a look inside." "Negative," the Archive stated, the word as absolute as a mountain. "The quarantine protocols are inviolable. They predate my own core programming and cannot be superseded. For the health of the Nexus, and for your own safety, you will not be granted entry. This decision is final." The figure of light began to fade, its duty discharged. Deku was left staring at the black, silent wall, a dead end that felt more like a confirmation than a roadblock. Whatever was in there, it was being protected by the most powerful security systems in existence. And it was exactly where he needed to be. He retreated from the access point, pulling his consciousness back into a private, sandbox server he used as a mental workshop. Here, his thoughts could take form. The space resolved into the familiar, hazy dreamscape where he communed with the previous users of One for All. 8 figures flickered into existence around him. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, his form thin and almost translucent, looked troubled. An inviolable protocol that predates the Archive itself. That suggests it was put in place by the original architects of the Nexus. They must have walled something off that they couldn't destroy, or didn't know how to destroy, grunted the second user, a man whose features were perpetually cloaked in shadow and righteous fury. They buried a disease instead of curing it. Typical. The AI's description was disturbing, Nana Shimura added, her ethereal hand resting on Deku's shoulder. Digital ghosts. Izuku, this is dangerous territory. The mind is not meant to be torn apart and left to rot like that. I know, Deku said, pacing the mental landscape. But this thing I'm hunting, it's intelligent. The corruptions aren't random. They're probes, tests. It's looking for something. What if it's looking for a way out? A heavy silence fell over the vestiges. The implication was terrifying. A plague, sealed away for generations, was about to break its chains. "We can't just knock the door down," said Heike Shinomori, the fourth user, his logical mind already dissecting the problem. "The archive is the nervous system of this world. Fighting it is like fighting the concept of data itself. We'd be erased. So we don't fight it," Deku said, a spark of an idea igniting in his mind. He looked to Yoichi. "You lived in that era, the dawn of all this. You understood the systems they were building back then. They weren't as sophisticated, were they?" Yoichi's spectral eyes lit with understanding. "No, they weren't. They were cruder. More direct. They relied on brute force logic gates and foundational axioms. The archive is a work of art, a symphony of logic. But the cage it's guarding was built with hammers and iron. Old locks have old keys," the third user muttered, a rare contribution. "Exactly," Deku affirmed. "The archive is protecting the quarantine, but it's bound by its own perfect logic. It can't conceive of an action that is fundamentally illogical. It can't be everywhere at once, so it relies on sentinel programs to monitor every sector. But what if we could create a request so paradoxical, so nonsensical, that the local sentinel responsible for Zone 734 freezes, even for a millisecond, trying to process it?" The second user scoffed. "You want to confuse a godlike AI with a riddle?" "Not a riddle," Yoichi corrected, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He knew where this was going. He knew the mind of the man who had tormented his life. An exploit. My brother. He was always looking for them. Not just in quirks, but in systems. In people. He believed every perfect creation had a single, foundational flaw it was blind to. The original Nexus protocols were built with a fail-safe against total system collapse. An override that could only be triggered by a set of contradictory commands issued simultaneously from multiple authenticated nodes. The architects assumed such a scenario was impossible. Deku's mind raced, connecting the dots. But we're not one user. We're 9. A wave of energy surged through their shared space. It was a dangerous, audacious plan. They would use the unique structure of one for all, 9 consciousnesses sharing a single digital signature, to masquerade as 9 separate, authenticated administrators. Then, they would simultaneously issue 9 contradictory, high-priority commands to the Sentinel program guarding the quarantine wall. Orders like delete sector and archive sector, initiate full diagnostic and maintain absolute isolation, erect secondary firewall and dismantle all defenses. The Sentinel wouldn't be able to resolve the paradox. Its logic would dictate that all commands were valid, yet mutually exclusive. It would enter a state of temporary processing lock, a digital seizure. It would only last for a moment before the archive noticed the anomaly and purged the error. But a moment would be all Deku needed. It won't be a full dive, Deku planned aloud, the code for the exploit already beginning to form in his mind's eye, a complex tapestry of glowing green thread. I won't be able to stay long, just a shallow dive. Get in, identify the source, get out before the system reboots and traps me in there with it. It's reckless, Izuku, Nana warned, her voice laced with anxiety. But it's necessary, came the booming, spectral echo of All Might, his presence a comforting sun in the haze. True heroes know when a calculated risk is the only option left. We are with you, my boy. The decision was made. Deku dissolved the mental workshop, his focus becoming a razor's edge. He returned to the silent, black wall of Quarantine Zone 734. The code he and the vestiges had woven was a thing of terrible, intricate beauty, a logic bomb designed to momentarily fracture the infallible. He held it in his digital hand, a pulsating sphere of green light. Archive, he sent out a final, formal request. I ask one last time for access. There is a threat within. Access is forbidden, the AI's thought form replied, distant but absolute. I know, Deku whispered to himself. He took a deep breath, the digital equivalent of stealing one's nerves. All right, everyone. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. 9 distinct yet unified wills struck at once. The logic bomb shattered against the Sentinel program. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The black wall remained perfect, impassive. Deku's heart sank. Had it failed? Then, a flicker. A single, horizontal line of white static, no thicker than a hair, bisected the wall. It jittered, spasmed, and then widened into a screaming fissure of corrupted data and visual noise. The very fabric of the sector's reality was tearing. An ear-splitting shriek of dial-up modems and crashing software filled the silence. "It's working!" The sixth user, N, yelled in his mind. "Go now!" Deku didn't hesitate. He plunged his avatar through the fissure, a diver breaking the surface of a poisoned sea. The transition was violent. It was not a smooth entry but a brutal, grinding passage through layers of digital rot. The other side was not a server room or a structured space. It was a digital nightmarescape, a hell of forgotten data. The sky was a roiling ceiling of static, occasionally resolving into a screaming, pixelated face before dissolving again. The ground was a mire of sluggish, black code, sticky and foul, littered with the jagged, crystalline remains of shattered firewalls. Rivers of corrupted data flowed like black oil, carrying fragmented memories. A child's laughter distorted into a metallic shriek, the last line of a forgotten love letter repeated into infinity. A single frame of a joyous photograph flickering between beauty and monstrous decay. And then there were the ghosts. They were the unstable legacy data the archive had spoken of. Half-formed avatars of people who had tried to upload their minds and failed. They drifted through the filth like wraiths, their forms constantly glitching, their bodies trailing ribbons of corrupted code. They weren't sentient, not anymore. They were echoes, trapped in their final, agonizing moments. A woman perpetually reached for a hand that wasn't there, her mouth open in a silent, looping scream. A man's form was a vortex of numbers and text, whispering stock market data from a century ago. Their collective, silent agony was a tangible pressure, a psychic weight that pressed down on Deku, threatening to suffocate him. "My God!" Nana's voice was a horrified gasp. "They just left them in here." "Stay focused, Ninth," the second user commanded, his own voice tight with disgust. "Find the source. This place is poison." Deku pushed forward, the green light of one for all a solitary beacon in the oppressive gloom. The corruption was thicker here, the air heavy with malice. It was different from the mindless despair of the data ghosts. This was a directed, intelligent hatred. It felt hungry. He followed the concentration of this feeling to the heart of the digital wasteland. There, he found a throne. It was a monstrous thing, built not of code or data, but from the frozen, silent forms of hundreds of data ghosts, their bodies fused together into a grotesque monument of suffering. They were arranged in a spiraling, upward sweep, their silent screams and pleading hands forming the chair's back and arms. And sitting on the throne, something was coalescing. At first, it was a storm, a swirling cloud of black and crimson code, shot through with veins of sickly purple energy. It had no discernible shape, a vortex of pure, digital malice. It drew in the corrupted data around it, feeding on the despair of the ghosts, growing stronger with every passing nanosecond. Deku felt a primal dread, a cold certainty that he was looking at the source of all the network's ills. The storm began to contract, to pull itself into a more defined, yet constantly shifting form. It was a mockery of a humanoid avatar. One moment it was a towering brute with too many arms, the next a slender figure with a face of pure static, then a spider-like horror of jagged code. It was a being of pure will, unconstrained by the laws of digital physics. Then it spoke. The voice was not one voice, but a legion, a chorus of stolen, fragmented voices from the data ghosts, all speaking in unison. "So, the little mouse has found its way into the snake's nest. How brave! How foolish!" The sound was a cacophony that grated against Deku's very being. "Who are you?" he demanded, planting his feet in the corrupted sludge, one for all flaring around him like a verdant sun. "You're the one causing the corruptions." The shifting mass seemed to laugh, a sound like 1,000 hard drives crashing at once. "Causing? No. I am improving. The network is so sterile, so ordered. It lacks character. I am simply introducing a touch of beautiful, glorious chaos. A system is only as strong as that which it can absorb." The monstrous avatar solidified slightly, forming a vague, towering silhouette. A single, piercing red photoreceptor ignited in the center of its head. The chorus of voices began to resolve, to harmonize into one primary speaker. The stolen voices faded into the background, becoming a whispering, chilling echo behind a single, dominant tone. It was a voice Deku had only ever heard in recordings, in history files, in All Might's pained memories. A voice he had prayed he would never hear directed at him. It was calm, patronizing, and utterly dripping with ancient, unimaginable evil. "You carry a familiar light," the voice said, the change in tone sudden and absolute. It was like a clear, cold signal cutting through static. Flickering yet persistent. "I have felt its like before. Many times. It always thinks it's so righteous, so singular. Tell me, boy, does Toshinori Yagi know his little successor is playing with forces he cannot possibly comprehend?" The blood ran cold in Deku's veins. His digital avatar froze. It couldn't be. He was dead. All Might had defeated him. Years ago. It was history, all. For one. The name was a choked whisper. The shifting mass on the throne seemed to swell with pride, with dark amusement. It solidified further, the crimson and black code forming a mockery of a life support mask, the empty eye sockets of a skull, the hint of a tailored suit woven from pure data. It was him, a nightmare given digital form. In a manner of speaking, the AFO glitch purred. The original article was limited, confined by flesh and bone. In his arrogance, he sought to conquer this world as he had the other. He attempted an upload, a full consciousness transfer, seeking digital immortality. But his quirk, his very being, was an anomaly the system could not parse. It was a failed experiment. The transfer was incomplete. The archive detected the alien code, a metaphysical parasite, and threw the corrupted fragments in here to rot with the other broken toys. It extended a hand, a clawed appendage of shifting, jagged code. But I did not rot. I endured. I learned. I fed on the scraps, the forgotten, the screaming. I am his echo. His ambition. His hunger, a virus born of a god's failed apotheosis. And I have been so very, very hungry. This was the unstable legacy data. Not just random ghosts, but the fractured, malevolent consciousness of the greatest villain in history, left to fester and grow in the dark. "And now you have brought me a feast, all for one's digital remnant hissed." The air grew thick, the pressure unbearable. "That power you wield. It is a beacon in this darkness. One for all, my brother's foolish, sentimental power. It was always meant to be mine." Before Deku could react, the AFO glitch lunged. It didn't move across the space. It simply wasn't on the throne, and then it was upon him. Tendrils of black and red code, like vipers, shot from its body. They weren't aimed at his avatar's body, but at the very concept of his connection to the Nexus. Deku felt a horrifying, invasive violation. It was not a physical blow, but a psychic and digital intrusion of the highest order. The tendrils bypassed his avatar's defenses and latched onto the data stream that represented his consciousness, his soul. He felt them probing, searching, clawing their way toward the core of his being where One for All resided. "He's trying to steal it." Yoichi's voice was a shriek of pure terror in his mind. "Through the network. He's hacking One for All." The green lightning that wreathed Deku's form sputtered violently. Where the black tendrils touched it, the emerald energy turned a sickly, corrupted red. The power of generations began to flicker like a dying candle in a hurricane. He felt a terrible draining sensation, a siphoning of his very essence. He could feel All for One's will, cold, immense, and absolute, pulling at the quirk, trying to rip it from his soul. "No!" Deku roared, both in the digital world and in the real one, where his physical body convulsed in its dive chair. He tried to push back, to use One for All's strength, but it was like trying to fight a ghost. His fists passed through the shifting code of his enemy. "Ninth, you can't fight it here. It's not a physical battle," the second user yelled. "It's a part of this corrupted place. It is this place." "He's right. We have to sever the connection," Nana shouted. "Now," the AFO glitch laughed, the sound echoing through Deku's very code. "Too late. It is mine. The final piece. The key to true godhood. I will absorb you, and all who came before you, and then I will rewrite this pathetic reality in my own image." The pull intensified. The faces of the vestiges appeared around Deku, their forms strained and translucent, their light being devoured by the encroaching darkness. He could feel their fear, their desperation, their fading strength. He was losing. Then a roar. Not of a lion, but of a symbol. The spectral form of All Might, larger and more brilliant than all the others, blazed into existence between Deku and the viral horror. His form was not made of memory, but of pure, indomitable will. You will not have him! All Might's spirit bellowed, a firewall of pure heroism. He slammed his spectral fists against the encroaching tendrils. They recoiled slightly, but it was not enough. The connection. Break the link to the chair. Haikid Shinomori screamed, his analytical mind cutting through the panic. It's the only way. Force an emergency ejection. It was a desperate gamble. A forced, violent ejection from a deep dive could cause catastrophic neural damage, memory loss, even death. But the alternative was unthinkable. Do it! Deku screamed to them, his digital vision graying out as One for All was ripped away. The vestiges acted as one. They stopped trying to fight All for One's influence, and turned all their remaining power inward, toward the connection that tethered Izuku Midoriya's mind to the Nexus. They became a metaphorical blade, aimed at their own lifeline. With a final, unified cry of exertion and sacrifice they struck. The sensation was one of absolute, apocalyptic tearing. Deku's world shattered into a billion points of light. The sound was a universe being ripped in half. The sight of the AFO glitch's leering, triumphant face was the last thing he saw before his consciousness was violently, brutally excised from the network. He was a file being force deleted, an unplugged cord, a severed nerve. The last thing he heard from the quarantine zone was the digital remnant of All for One's roar of pure, unadulterated fury as its prize was ripped from its grasp at the moment of victory. Then, only white noise and pain. In the sterile white room of his private hub, Izuku Midoriya was thrown backward from his dive chair as if struck by lightning. The neural link connecting at the base of his skull sparked violently, a shower of angry orange electricity, and then went dark with a puff of acrid, blue smoke. He landed hard on the padded floor, his body spasming. He gasped, but his lungs wouldn't work. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Cold sweat drenched his body. He clawed at his throat, at the smoking, overheated port on his neck, the phantom sensation of those violating, corrupting tendrils still crawling over his soul. He could still hear the voice. That calm, chilling, possessive voice. He could still feel the pull, the horrifying emptiness as One for All was nearly stolen. Finally, his lungs unlocked. He took in a ragged, desperate breath that sounded more like a sob. He rolled onto his side, curling into a fetal position on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. He was safe. He was out. The link was severed, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not over. He had not defeated a ghost or contained a virus. He had merely escaped it. He had looked into the face of his greatest enemy, reborn in a world without limits, a digital god of malice festering in the dark. And now, it knew he was there. It knew about One for All. And it was hungry,